in North Carolina. Mark, you're live with Eric and Jim. What would you like to talk about today?
Hi, guys. How you doing?
Hey.
Hey.
We're doing well. What would you like to talk about today?
Well, I had a question on how I've heard you and other atheists state that we cannot be absolutely certain about anything.
Mhm.
And I have a reasoning that not only that we can, but in some cases we should.
Okay. Lay it on us.
Okay. So I have two examples I kind of like to share with you guys.
Sure. Hit us with your best.
What's that? I'm sorry.
Oh, I said hit us with your best. Let's do the best first.
Oh, all right. So I know I'm on a phone call. You can't see me right now, but I'm holding a little doggy chew toy in my hand. Okay. I can see it. I can feel it. I can interact with it. I'm having this experience of it, tossing it up, up in the air and catching it again. I can drop it and it falls in a predictive manner that deals with all the other evidence that I've seen of things falling. So why should I not, one, be absolutely certain that I exist because I'm experiencing these things, but also that, I'm at where I'm at and this ball is in my hand?
So I'm not going to argue cogito ergo sum with you that you exist, but I will say,
Okay.
How did you get out of the problem of hard solipsism? How do you know that you can trust your sense perceptions?
How can I know I can trust my sense perceptions? Because these are the only perceptions of experience that I have at all.
In order
to not trust them, if I do not trust them, then just evolutionary wise, there's a higher chance that I could die if I do not trust my senses.
But that's just an appeal to consequent. That doesn't justify, that's not a good reason to have it. I'll give you an example. You could be in the Matrix and not have any way to test whether or not you're in the Matrix, right? To say that you have absolute certainty, what I call capital T truth, would, in my mind, have eliminated that possibility. And I don't know how we get past that. And so the question that I have is, how do you know that you're not just hooked up to the Matrix?
Okay. Well, my response to that is, okay, my certainty should be based on the evidence I do have and not the evidence I don't. So let me ask you a couple questions. Is there any evidence that we are living in a matrix?
Would there be any evidence if we lived in a perfect matrix? And the answer to that is no, there would not be any evidence if we lived in a perfect matrix. The only way we'd find evidence is if the matrix wasn't perfect in some way. So, and that was kind of the whole point of the Matrix movie, right? Was how do you know we're not living in that matrix and in that perfectly recreated sensory input world of the Matrix? And so we can't actually know whether or not we are or are not in the Matrix. If it's perfect, if it's not perfect, we look for the flaws.
Right. Okay. So, so here we have, this is how I see it in my mind. Here we have a concept that, one, has no evidence that it's true, and two, has no way of even able to obtain evidence that it's true. So why should I allow a concept like that to decrease my certainty in the evidence that I do have?
Because my understanding of absolute certainty, now it might be different for you, and we might just be talking past each other with definitions, but my understanding of absolute certainty would take that into account, would be able to say, you're absolutely certain that you're in this place experiencing this thing. The response that, how can you trust your sense perceptions, is why I think that ultimately that capital T truth statement, that absolute certainty, is not only unnecessary but impossible to have in many cases. I think that there are things we can be absolutely certain about and can make deductive arguments about, and those are things that we define to be true. But when we're not talking about things that we have definitions for and are working with them as a definition, you're using an induction, and it's actually called the problem of induction. We can't get there. Because of that, I would say that setting your sights on saying that you can have absolute certainty, we can aspire to it.
About some things. I'm not saying we should have absolute certainty about everything.
Right. So
but
you gave
there are,
I think that we cannot have absolute certainty about. Like, how can I have absolute certainty that any of you are there? How can you have absolute certainty that we're not a part of some bigger, figment of your imagination? How do you know that you're not just the only one in the matrix and we're all just constructs? You can't.
Just from my own experience with interacting with people, from the evidence of other history, of other people that has lived and died in the world, through my family and my children. I mean, these are all evidence that I have that I am not alone, that I am sharing this reality with them.
I'm sure
both in the present and the past.
I'm sure you
and
can.
we
Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, and we completely agree with that. The question becomes that we have is any of that actually really real, right? Because
we have
if I can wire your brain to sense things.
I mean, that's kind of my reasoning, is that we have no evidence to the contrary. The living in matrix, brain in a jar, any other kind of that kind of reasoning. There's what we have evidence for is what we are experiencing. That is the only evidence we have.
Yes.
So shouldn't our certainty be based on that evidence and not be decreased on things that not only we cannot prove, but are in fact improvable?
Yeah. What we're arguing about is 100% certainty versus 99.999. And I don't, some of that is philosophical, talking about things, and we have to live our life as if everything we are experiencing is real because we have no other choice. But by the same token, to make that 100% isn't entirely accurate. So you live your life as if it's 100%, but you can also acknowledge that it's not 100%. It's 99.99, whatever you want to say it is. Yeah. And so that's kind of what we're talking about, the difference between, I think, from what you're saying. But I completely agree with you that we have to live our lives as if we have that degree of certainty, as if the sun will come up tomorrow, not just because it came up yesterday, but also because that's what the laws of physics say.
I can actually make a case for you as to why that's better. So long as we aren't entirely certain about a thing, we're open to being wrong. If I were to provide evidence that was convincing to something that you thought was absolutely true, if you're sitting on that as an absolute fact, it's very hard to move away from. But when you're faced with evidence, and you reapply your understanding, I think that there's serious value in saying, I'm not entirely certain about anything. I think that is part of this amazing, human experience that guides us toward innovation.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's awesome.
Okay, that part makes sense. That part makes sense to me.
That part, though, is not entirely related to whether or not the statement is true. I'm making a case for why it's a good thing, but I'm not necessarily making a case for it being true. I'm just saying that there is value there.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like I said, I'm a realist, so I accept the evidence that I'm given and deal with it as best as I can. Mm-hmm. So what you kind of said makes a little more sense to me So it's not like if I said I'm absolutely certain about something, I am also absolutely closed to anything else or that changing with new evidence. I'm just saying that with the evidence we have, we can be absolutely certain about some things.
Is it that hard to say I'm 99.99 bar certain over 100?
For some things, well, for some things, for me, yes.
Like what? You gave us an example, and we didn't agree with your example about the dog toy.
Okay, so my other example has to do with something about as serious as reality gets. So here's something real serious and personal. 2 weeks ago, on March 16th, my mother died of a sudden heart attack.
I'm so sorry to hear that.
So, thank you very much. Thank you. With all of the evidence that I have and the experience that I have with life and death, I know that I will never see her living face again. I'll never be able to hug her. I'll never be able to look at her and tell her that I love her again. Okay? So why should I not be absolutely certain about those things?
So I think that the difference between degrees of certainty that we're talking about and behaving as though you are certain, I think that we're starting to get into semantics there. Because we're not going to disagree with you on basic things that we understand. What I'm saying is that to say you have absolute certainty about most things is taking it just a step further than we're capable of taking it. Right. So
I never said we should have absolute certainty. I never said we should have absolute certainty about most things. I said we can and we should have absolute certainty about some things.
Right. Can I give you an example of one that we can have absolute certainty about?
Sure.
Unmarried bachelors.
Yes, logical.
All bachelors being unmarried. And we can have absolute certainty about it because we defined it that way. Right.
Yes. I am absolutely certain that right now we are having a conversation about absolute certainty.
Yeah,
that's where I disagree. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm 99.99999% certain that there is somebody else on the other end of this call, and that the images of Eric and your voice are actually real and not just figments of my imagination. But I cannot rule out that somebody with sufficient technology couldn't have hooked me up to a machine, or far more realistically, that I'm not having a hallucination. Because we know people who have defects in the brain that will convince them 100% that there's somebody else in the room and there is nobody there. And it doesn't even have to be defects in the brain. Sailors who single-hand sailing often experience hallucinations that they believe are real and do real things like set sails. And yet there's nobody on the boat, and the only person on the boat who could have set that sail was them. But they will swear to you it was their phantom. That's just basic brain, the way the brain works. So, or doesn't work in the case of people who have that mental illness. So how do you know that your grandmother actually existed and that she wasn't just a group hallucination?
Because all the other evidence of people who have ever interacted with her.
Right, but group people do have. Yeah, people do have group hallucinations, though.
Okay.
So
yeah, you see what you see when we start looking at that.
So group hallucinations can exist, but through interactions of people and things and everything else that we experience in reality, I can be absolutely certain that she did exist as I remember her, as well as at least as I mostly remember her, because our memories can be shoddy, right? But I can be absolutely certain that she did exist, and that she is dead due to the evidence that I do have.
Right. And people have convinced themselves that they remember things that never happened.
We're not saying that
yes, that is true.
Yeah, I really feel like this is starting to become.
I'm not talking so much about specific. I'm not talking about so much about specific memories or very, very specific experiences. Just the experience that, you know, she lived. She was my mother, and she's now gone. That is what I think I could be and should be absolutely certain about.
I'm just saying that absolute certainty can't be proven. And maybe we just are using different definitions. But I think we're talking in circles a little bit. I think this has been a good conversation, though.
Yeah.
I'm glad we called in.
Lots of fun.
Okay, well, thanks a lot, guys. It was great talking to you again, Eric. I appreciate you taking my call.
Absolutely. Take care, brother. Be safe out there, all right?
Yep, you too.
Take it easy.
Right, bye.